The fluorescent lights of Frost Enterprises hummed well past midnight, casting long shadows across the polished marble of the executive floor. Dominic Frost glanced at his watch 1:15 a.m. as he pushed through the glass doors of his office. At 42, he'd built an empire on ruthless efficiency and uncompromising standards. His steel-gray eyes had a way of making even the most confident executives wither. He stopped abruptly at the sight of an elderly man in faded blue coveralls, methodically dusting the awards display outside the boardroom. What are you doing here?" Dominic's voice cut through the silence. The janitor turned slowly, his weathered face calm under a shock of white hair. His name tag read Thomas. "Cleaning, sir," Thomas replied, continuing his work. "Not at this hour, and not on this floor." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Executive level requires special clearance. Who let you up here?" Thomas carefully wiped a smudge from a crystal award. "Been working here 26 years, Mr. Frost. I have all the proper clearances. I'm revoking them effective immediately." Dominic pulled out his phone. "This area is reserved for people who actually matter to this company." Thomas paused, setting down his cleaning cloth. He met Dominic's gaze without flinching. "With respect, sir, I'm looking for my daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Dominic faltered, his finger hovering over security's number. "Your daughter," he scoffed. "And why would your daughter be in my executive wing at 1 a.m? She often works late, brings her dinner sometimes." Thomas smiled faintly. "She forgets to eat when she's focused." Dominic narrowed his eyes. "Who exactly is your daughter?" "It's Eleanor Parker. She runs your marketing division." Dominic's phone nearly slipped from his fingers. Eleanor Parker. The brilliant strategist who'd revolutionized their brand positioning, the woman whose quiet intelligence had caught his attention in every meeting, one executive he couldn't intimidate or dismiss. "Possible," he muttered. Thomas reached into his pocket and produced a worn photograph of himself with a younger Eleanor, her arm around his shoulders, both beaming. "Nothing's impossible with that girl," Thomas said with quiet pride. "Single-handedly put herself through business school while helping me after her mother passed. Works harder than anyone I know." Dominic stared at the photo, remembering Eleanor's presentation just yesterday. Confident, innovative, unstoppable. Never once had she mentioned her father mopped the same floors she conquered in her heels. "She doesn't know I check on her," Thomas continued. "Wouldn't like me worrying. But a father does what a father does." Dominic handed back the photo wordlessly. Something uncomfortable stirred in his chest, a feeling he'd long since buried beneath acquisitions and profit margins. "I'll be on my way now," Thomas said, gathering his cleaning supplies. "Didn't mean to disturb you, Mr. Frost." The janitor shuffled toward the service elevator. Dominic called after him. "Thomas." The old man turned. "You have clearance?" Dominic said stiffly. "Carry on." As Thomas disappeared, Dominic stood alone in the corridor, surrounded by the gleaming symbols of his success that suddenly seemed hollow in the empty building. He walked to the marketing department and paused at Eleanor's office. Through the glass, he could see her still working, brow furrowed in concentration over spreadsheets. Completely unaware of the encounter that had just shaken her boss's carefully constructed world, the morning executive meeting buzzed with the usual tension that accompanied Dominic's presence. He sat at the head of the table, half listening to quarterly projections until Eleanor Parker rose to present the new campaign. He studied her with new eyes, her confident posture, the intelligent spark in her hazel eyes, the way she commanded respect without demanding it. Nothing about her suggested she was the daughter of a janitor. Yet there was a groundedness to her that suddenly made sense. "Mr. Frost, your thoughts on the proposal?" Eleanor's voice broke through his contemplation. "Proceed with implementation," he said curtly, ignoring the surprised looks from other executives accustomed to his merciless critiquing. Later that afternoon, Dominic found himself standing in the observation deck overlooking the company cafeteria. He spotted Thomas sitting alone at a corner table, carefully unwrapping a simple sandwich. Just as he was about to take a bite, Eleanor appeared, setting down her tray across from him. Even from a distance, Dominic could see the transformation in Thomas's face, how it lit up at the sight of his daughter. They talked animatedly, Eleanor occasionally reaching across to squeeze her father's hand. Dominic watched, transfixed. As Thomas slipped an apple from his own lunch into Eleanor's bag when she wasn't looking, They do that every Tuesday and Thursday, said a voice beside him. Dominic turned to find his assistant, Vera, standing there with a folder. You knew? He asked. Everyone knows except you, sir, Vera replied carefully. Miss Parker doesn't advertise it, but she doesn't hide it either. She's proud of him. Dominic frowned. Why wouldn't she mention it in her interviews, her background? Perhaps because executives with certain biases might not see beyond it, Vera suggested, handing him the folder. Your 2 o'clock is waiting. Throughout the meeting, Dominic's mind kept returning to the cafeteria scene. He'd always viewed relationships as transactional, useful connections, strategic marriages, alliances of convenience. The genuine affection between Eleanor and Thomas felt foreign, almost uncomfortable to witness. That evening, he found himself driving past Eleanor's address, a modest apartment in a working class neighborhood far from the luxury high-rises where most executives lived. Through the ground floor window, he glimpsed Eleanor and Thomas at a small dinner table laughing over a meal. On impulse, Dominic accessed Thomas's employee file on his tablet. 42 years old when Eleanor was born, widowed 15 years ago. Minimal education. Maximum dedication, never late, never absent, exceptional performance reviews from facility managers. And there it was, a note about Thomas's arthritis, worsening over the past year. Recommendations for lighter duty denied due to budget constraints, medical expenses mounting, yet the man never complained. Sir? We've been parked for 20 minutes, his driver said hesitantly. Should we head home? Dominic looked up, suddenly aware of the creeping darkness. Yes, Jensen, home. But as his penthouse elevator ascended 30 floors above the city, Dominic couldn't shake the image of Thomas's hands, gnarled and worn from decades of labor, gently placing that apple in his daughter's bag. Or the quiet pride in Eleanor's eyes when she looked at her father, for the first time in years. Dominic's immaculate apartment felt what it truly was, empty. No photographs, no mementos, nothing but expensive furniture and meaningless awards. What's the point of it all? He whispered to the silence. The question lingered, unanswered. As the night deepened around him, Dominic sat motionless in his office, staring at the document before him, simple reassignment form that would move. Thomas from night shifts to days, from the demanding executive level to the less physically taxing lobby, better hours, same pay, less strain on arthritic joints. His pen hovered over the signature line. Will there be anything else, Mr. Frost? His assistant asked from the doorway. Have facilities upgrade the janitorial break room, he said without looking up. New furniture, better coffee machine, proper refrigerator. That's unexpectedly generous, Vera remarked carefully. It's practical. Comfortable workers are productive workers. He signed the form with a decisive stroke. And this reassignment is confidential. If anyone asks, it was a routine rotation. Over the following weeks, Dominic found himself making more such practical decisions. An anonymous donation to cover Thomas's medical expenses. A company-wide minimum wage increase, the installation of ergonomic equipment for maintenance staff. Each morning, he nodded briefly to Thomas in the lobby, receiving a puzzled but pleasant nod in return. The old janitor looked better already, less exhausted, standing straighter. One Tuesday, Dominic deliberately timed his lunch to coincide with Eleanor and Thomas's regular meeting. He selected a table nearby, pretending to read reports while eavesdropping shamelessly. Dad, you're looking so much better, Eleanor was saying. And don't think I haven't noticed you've been taking the elevator instead of the stairs. New company. Policy, Thomas replied, sipping from an insulated coffee mug that had replaced his old chipped one. And the new schedule means I can take those water aerobics classes at the community center. The doctor says it's helping the arthritis. I'm just glad someone finally listened. I've been trying to get you better conditions for years. Someone up. There must be looking out for me, Thomas said, glancing upward with a meaningful smile. Dominic ducked his head, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. Pride? Satisfaction? Whatever it was, it felt better than closing any deal. Later that afternoon, Eleanor knocked on his office door. Do you have a moment, Mr. Frost? She asked. Of course, Ms. Parker, the Japanese account. Actually, it's about the company changes lately. She sat across from him, studying his face. The wage increases. The facility improvements. They're not exactly in line with your usual ... approach. Markets evolve. Companies must adapt. He shuffled papers, avoiding her penetrating gaze. Is that all it is? Adaptation? Something in her tone made him look up. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Dominic felt strangely exposed. What else would it be, he managed? I don't know, she said thoughtfully. That's what intrigues me. After she left, Dominic found himself standing at his window, watching the city below. For 20 years, he'd built his reputation on being coldly efficient, ruthlessly focused on the bottom line. Change came with risks. People might see weakness, vulnerability. Yet something was shifting inside him, like ice breaking up after a long winter. That night, he found himself in a small bookstore, purchasing a collection of poetry that Thomas had mentioned to Eleanor during lunch. The cashier smiled as he handed over his credit card. Gift? She asked. No, Dominic replied, surprising himself. It's for me. Back home, he opened the book to a random page and began to read. Words about connection, about seeing beauty and simplicity, about the courage it takes to be truly seen. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Dominic Frost fell asleep with something other than profit margins on his mind. The boardroom crackled with tension as Dominic paced before the presentation screen. The Wilson account is slipping, he announced. We need fresh ideas immediately. Executives shifted nervously, except for Eleanor, who was already flipping through her notes. Perhaps a collaborative approach, she suggested. Wilson values authenticity. What if we bring together our top strategists and their team for a 3-day intensive workshop? Break down the hierarchy. Build genuine trust. Dominic paused his pacing. 6 months ago, he would have dismissed such an approach as inefficient sentimentality. Now he found himself nodding. Excellent. You'll lead it, he decided, and I'll participate personally. The room fell silent in shock. Dominic Frost never participated in client workshops. That will be all. He dismissed the others, but caught Eleanor's eye. Ms. Parker, a moment, please. When they were alone, he cleared his throat awkwardly. I may be ... somewhat out of practice with collaboration. Perhaps we could strategize beforehand. Eleanor's surprise melted into a small smile. Dinner at Mercado tonight? Their back table is perfect for working sessions. During their dinner, Dominic found himself talking about more than just the Wilson account. He mentioned books he'd been reading, questions about leadership that had been troubling him. Eleanor listened intently, challenging his assumptions without judgment. Why this sudden interest in connection? She asked over dessert. You've built an empire on quite the opposite philosophy. Dominic swirled his espresso thoughtfully. Let's just say I've had reason to reevaluate certain ... priorities. Well, whoever or whatever inspired this change, Eleanor said, raising her cup in a small toast. I approve. Their working dinner became a regular occurrence, then lunches. Soon they were texting each other articles and ideas at all hours. The Wilson workshop was a spectacular success. With Dominic surprising everyone, including himself, with his attentive listening and genuine engagement. One evening, as they walked from the office to a nearby restaurant, they passed Thomas carefully, tending the planters outside the building entrance. Evening, Ellie, he called cheerfully, then added with a nod, Mr. Frost. Hello, Thomas, Dominic replied warmly. The chrysanthemums look exceptional. Thomas looked startled, then pleased. Thank you, sir. I've been experimenting with a new organic fertilizer. As they continued walking, Eleanor gave Dominic a curious sideways glance. You know my father's name? That he handles the landscaping? I make it my business to know my employees, he replied carefully. You never did before? The directness of her statement made him stop walking. Pedestrians flowed around them like a stream around stones. Before what? She pressed gently. Dominic looked into her eyes, seeing the same quiet strength he'd observed in Thomas. Before I met someone who made me see things differently. Back at the office the next day, Dominic was reviewing contracts when Thomas knocked on his open door, wheeling his cleaning cart. Don't mind me, sir. Just need to get the trash. Actually, Thomas, I could use a break, Dominic said, closing his laptop. Coffee? The older man hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. They sat in the small seating area of Dominic's office, an unlikely pair sharing silence that gradually eased into conversation. Ellie seems happy lately, Thomas remarked casually. More energized about work than I've seen in years. She's remarkable, Dominic admitted. You must be very proud, every day. Thomas's eyes crinkled. But I'm curious what a man like you sees in spending time with her. Dominic met the father's protective gaze directly. Clarity, perspective, the chance to become someone better than I was. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Well, that's a start, I suppose. As Thomas left, Dominic realized that for the first time in his life, he wanted someone's approval for reasons that had nothing to do with business advantage. That night, standing on his penthouse balcony, Dominic finally admitted to himself what had been growing increasingly obvious. He was falling in love with Eleanor Parker, and somehow, against all odds, he thought she might be falling for him too. Rain streamed down the windows of Frost Enterprises. As Dominic stared at the resignation letter on his desk, his own signature, his own words, ending 20 years of single-minded ambition. The board would receive it tomorrow, along with his recommendation that Eleanor Parker succeed him as CEO. Knock interrupted his thoughts. You wanted to see me? Eleanor stood in the doorway, curious. Yes, please, sit. Dominic gestured to the chair across from him, then impulsively moved to the one beside it instead. Actually, I'd prefer if this wasn't a conversation across a desk. Eleanor raised an eyebrow but complied. Should I be concerned? That depends, he said, suddenly finding it difficult to maintain his usual composure. Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you. Several things, actually. He took a deep breath. First, I've come to know your father quite well over these past months. Thomas is one of the finest men I've ever met. Ah! Surprise flickered across her face. You've been talking with my father? Coffee every Tuesday morning for the past 3 months, Dominic admitted. He's been teaching me about his urban gardening techniques, much more, though he might not realize it. That explains his mysterious friend at work, she said slowly. But why? Dominic leaned forward. Because 5 months ago I encountered him working late in the executive wing. When I ordered him to leave, he simply said he was looking for his daughter. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. That night, I was finishing the Asian market analysis. He worries when I work past midnight. That moment changed everything for me, Dominic continued. Seeing how he spoke about you, the love and pride in his voice, I realized I'd built an empire but had nothing of real value. He gestured around his expansive office. All this means nothing without connection, without purpose, beyond accumulation. So the company changes, the improvements for staff, or my attempt to become worthy of the respect I saw in your eyes when you looked at your father, he finished. And eventually, worthy of more than just your respect. Leonard's expression softened. Dominic ... I'm stepping down as CEO, he said, pushing the letter toward her, and recommending you as my replacement. What? She gasped. Why would you? Because you'll lead with both brilliance and humanity. Because the company needs that balance. He hesitated, then added quietly, and because I've fallen in love with you. I can't be your boss if there's any chance you might feel something for me too. For a long moment, Eleanor was silent, processing his words. Then she reached for his hand. My father told me something interesting last week, she said. He said sometimes people come into our lives when we least expect it and change everything. Wise man, your father. He also said he'd never seen me look at anyone the way I look at you, she added softly. Raindrops raced down the windows as Dominic leaned forward, gently touching his forehead to hers. I don't deserve this second chance. That's not for you. To decide, Eleanor whispered, meeting his gaze. And for the record, resigned from Wilson's workshop to collaborative approach the moment you started quoting poetry over strategy sessions. Their laughter was interrupted by another knock. Thomas stood in the doorway, raincoat dripping slightly onto the carpet. Sorry to interrupt, he said, looking between them with knowing eyes. Just wanted to tell Ellie I'm heading home early. Knees acting up with the rain? Dominic stood immediately. I insist on driving you, Thomas. In fact, Dot dot. He glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. Dot dot. Perhaps you'd both join me for dinner. I believe we have something to celebrate. As they walked through the lobby together, employees stared in amazement at the unlikely trio: the formerly cold-hearted CEO, the brilliant executive, and the humble janitor, united in conversation and laughter outside. The rain had stopped. Sunshine broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the city as Thomas placed a hand on Dominic's shoulder.